Screen, make sure I share the right one. Okay.
Let me ask real quick, Dave, how is Dean N6BV doing?
He's hanging in there. He's not in great shape. All right, so let me start the meeting here. So welcome everybody. We're going to do our usual, usually we hand the microphone around for those who haven't been to our meetings, and everybody says their name and call, but on Zoom, we've just been kind of calling our names out, but then I try to organize it by some scheme or other to keep everybody from doing it at once. So given that we just had the VHF contest, I thought I'd do it by grid square this time, which I don't think we ever did before. So if I call your grid, call out your name or call sign. So Charlie Mike 87 or 88?
K6XX.
Whiskey 9 Kilo Cuban Norway.
Norway Delta 2 Tango.
November
Alpha
6, November Zulu.
Alpha Japan 6 Victor.
Kilo
X-ray
X-ray
7
7
Golf.
Mike.
WX5
Mass.
WD6T.
W6.
Okay, we had a few doubles, but I think we all know each other. All right, CM 89 or 99? Nobody?
K6MM is Charlie Mike 87 was late to the call.
Okay. All right. Okay. How about Charlie Mike 96 or 86? Okay. 95 or 94?
WS7IV 95.
Okay. 97 or 98?
WC68 Rich.
AE6Y.
And 6 Whiskey Mike.
N6RO.
NA60. Kilowatt 6, kilowatt Mexico.
Charlie Nancy 80 or 81? Okay. CN 90 or 91? How about anywhere in DM?
K5 Radio Crazy DM09.
U6SX.
All right. How about anything I didn't call?
Whiskey
Alpha
Bravo
Echo.
6 to Japan, and CN85.
Alpha Echo 6, Juliet Victor, and Fox November 42.
That's a long
Whiskey
way.
6 Fox Bravo, Echo Mike 30.
Alpha Juliet 6 Tango, Echo Mike 66.
Okay, and those who have no grid. I guess these days with FT8, everybody knows what grids are. All right, proceeding. So here's what we're in for. I'll do some club biz. Then we're gonna have an awards update from our new manager, Byron, who I hope is on the call, but if not, I can fill in that. Then there's a contest update from Andy, along with a few friends. And finally, our featured presentation, an update on Solar Cycle 25 and propagation by Carl Luetzelschwab. I hope I pronounced that right, K9LA. So first of all, we had a modification of our bylaws and we had a vote. We had 85 yeses, 0 no's. And so it was passed unanimously. And how many other things can we say these days that everybody agrees on? So that's pretty good. On sadder news, we mourn the passing of K6GT, who died recently. He was a research physicist at Palo Alto Medical Research Foundation with a specialty in cardiac dynamics. He was also an associate professor at the Stanford University Medical School. He was active in NCCC, and he had lots of other hobbies, including clock repair, woodworking, large G-scale trains that you have in the backyard. He was a music aficionado at classical jazz and opera. He was a backpacker, etc. Now, one of the last things he did for NCCC was to nominate a new member. And so we're going to vote in a new member here. This is Craig, WA60XK, who was a colleague of his. Craig lives in Los Altos Hills, and he's an MD and professor of cardiovascular surgery at Stanford University. He's nominated by K6GT and WD6T, me, and K6AW. His station, his HF station is a ICOM 7800 with an alpha 9500. He's got a KLM tri-bander and antennas for 40 in the work bands, and you can see them over there on the right. Nice tower. He's also, I think, on an elevated location, so he's got a nice slope. He also got a VHF and UHF station on 2 meters, 70 centimeters, and 23 centimeters. He's mostly phone, a little bit of CW.
Yay!
And his favorite contests, he says, are field day and the sideband sweepstakes. So I'm not sure if he's on the call. Craig, are you on the call? Okay, I don't think so. So normally we make him leave the room, but if he's not here anyway, we'll see if anybody has any objection. And hearing nothing, whoops, hearing nothing, he's voted in. Moving along here, our next meeting is February 15th, and another evening, similar time, mark it on your calendars. And our speaker is going to be Kevin, K6TD, who's going to do a very interesting studio report that I think you won't want to miss. Kevin's been working very hard. The title he gave me for the talk is The Emergence of a New Hilltop M2 Station, K6MTU, in a location known to many South Bay ops. And these are my bullet points I put down, that this station was a collaboration between multiple hams. I'm sure we'll talk about how they got the land, put it together, et cetera, et cetera. It's fully remote. It's a spectacular QTH, and they've been winning major contests, including the RTTY Roundup in 2021 in the M2 high power category. And it's being continually developed and improved. So most of you probably know Kevin. He's among other things, the president of the Northern California DX Foundation. He's a DXer, a contester, DXpeditioner, great engineer, working at Elcraft now, used to work at Flex, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, we're going to have a new awards manager. Gary, NA60, is retiring after doing a fantastic job, and he's passing the baton to Byron Servies, N6NUL. So now I'm going to check again. Is Byron on the call? Okay, apparently not. So therefore, I'm going to cover for him and do the slides. 1 second. Okay. Okay, let's see. Sorry about this. Play from start. There we go. You seeing that?
Yes.
Okay, good. So this is an update on the Asia Pacific Challenge. This is a new award program that we just started this year. We've completed our first year, and pretty soon we'll be going to the second. So we're going to give the results. There are a total of 6 contests in the challenge, and for 2021, only 5 of them were actually participated in, mainly because the Oceania sideband coincided with CQP. The three top QSO totals are going to be shown in red. The first one won a $50 gift card, the second $30, and the third a $20 to Starbucks. The object was to increase participation in these events and support our friends in the Pacific who support us in their contests. Only WD6T entered more than half the contests. but we're going to work on the rules a little more, and we'll be announcing new rules before April 5th. So moving right along, here's the results. The winning most QSOs station was N6 TV with 1257, all in one contest, which was, I think, all Asia CW. WD6T had 785 in 4 contests, one of which was the Oceania CW, where I was 15 meters only, and wasn't very many QSOs, but it was a lot of fun. K2RD was third with 508, and lots of other people participated, but all in only one contest. So maybe we can get a little more participation next time. So of the people who participated, 12 of them were in All Asian CW, 3 were in All Asian Sideband, nobody in the Sideband Oceania, 5 in the CW Oceania, and 5 in JIDX Sideband. What about JIDX CW? That wasn't listed in any case.
That's because that's in April and that's before you set up the rules.
Okay. So total number of 3830 submissions for all the tests was 25. And the only other entry was a multi, which doesn't count for this challenge, but it was 4,191 QSOs in the K3AST call sign at N6RO. That's it for that. Next, let's see. Oops. Next, I'm going to turn it over to Andy. Let me bring up his slides. There we go. Take it, Andy.
Great. Thank you, Dave. Really appreciate it. What I'd like to do is do 2 things. One is to highlight some really interesting club results and great results, particularly in the RTTY Roundup. And then I want to have sort of a not exactly a panel discussion. We're trying to figure out how to have a real contest discussion, and it's very awkward on Zoom to sort of have repartee among people. It's difficult, as you can tell from the last half hour, actually. So what I'm going to do is show some slides showing results we had of RTTY Roundup. Then I've asked some people who were in different categories specifically to comment for a minute or 2 each. And maybe we'll get some discussion going as well about several of the categories. I think the people are here. When we conclude that, I want to talk briefly about NAQP CW, which we just had last weekend. It's a little premature for the results, although a lot of scores have been posted. And in particular, we're going to talk a bit about the assisted and unassisted categories. And Jim is going to help me, K9YC, on that as well. And then we'll briefly point out upcoming contests. So I don't want to take up too much time, but I really would like to have a real contest discussion. So let's go to the next slide. The RTTY Roundup was a really interesting contest. I say that as someone who does not operate RTTY, but I got on and I used my 7600 and a keyboard into the USB port on the front. And I don't use logging software to generate RTTY. I just use the radio and I decode by squinting at the radio decoder. It's really primitive. And then I log separately. So everything I have to type twice. But I made 700 Qs and it was really a lot of fun. But that pales in comparison to some of these scores. For example, in the single op, Bill won the whole contest at F1A. Unfortunately, his score doesn't count for the club, but he's one of the people I've asked to talk. And then Jeff did a great job also and came in 3rd place. W6EU has a notable result as well. And then on the assisted, there are other great results. Chris, who's here at N6RO, and N6IE, K9YC, and I particularly noted the QRP score of K6EI at 22K. But I think these are all terrific results and they add up to the club total, which we'll get to in a minute or 2. Next slide. Then these are digital scores only. This is an interesting category and the scores are quite a bit lower. On the other hand, KW6S got 723 digital Qs. And K8FT worked 55 states and provinces, which is quite a bit for that mode. So this is an interesting approach. And of course, there's a lot of debate, I'm sure you follow on the Reflector, about whether this should be a RTTY contest, whether there should be digital or not, and people have different opinions on that. I have no opinion, by the way, but I certainly would entertain others. Next slide. Then in the mixed category, Paul did a great job with KK6P, W7IV, and he's going to talk later too, with almost 1,500 cues on RTTY, plus a whole bunch of digital cues. And then Hank also did well, blending both rates. And I'd like to have them speak a little bit about what it means to have the digital and whether they feature it or whether, as it looks more like from these results, they sort of go to that when the rates slow down. But I'd like to have them talk about it. And then we had some very notable rates in the next 10 also, W1RH, K6OK, TQ, and AF6SA all posted very nice scores. Next slide. And then the multis. Well, we got W6YX Classic, and Mike couldn't make it, but John 4 is here, W6LD, to talk about that. And they had I'd like to hear how they did a multi-2 with only 3 guys. And it sounds interesting. And then in the multi-single category, there were 3 very nice scores from the club. And I know Tom, ND2T, is here to talk about that a bit as well. But all of these scores are really admirable scores. And they show a great participation. In fact, let's go to the next slide. That really is a participation. And the club results. This was a focused contest. We had 71 logs so far, over 3 million points. And then as far as we can tell from 3830, we're well ahead of PVRC and SMC, which appear to be the closest competitors. So it actually looks like another NCCC win. So I think that's a great result. And I think it's a tribute to, I remember a couple of years ago, we barely got about 50 logs. In fact, there was frantic emails going around after the contest asking people who might have made 20 cues to please put in a log because we wanted to get into the large club category. But no trouble with that this year. And this is a great result. And I think a real tribute to everybody who got on, and to also the club's real emphasis on RTTY in recent years. So before we go further in the slide presentation, I'd like to have a little discussion about this contest and talk to, and the way I've proposed to organize this is I'd like to talk first, or have 2 speakers talk about the RTTY only aspect of it. And I've asked W9KKN Bill, who obviously did spectacularly well remotely at ZF1A, and then W1RH Bob, who operated from home and who was complaining that he didn't get enough mults. But I'd like to have him talk a little bit about what he did or didn't do and should have done. So why don't we first turn it over to Bill, if you don't mind. Tell us a little bit about your operation.
Sure. So first of all, thanks everybody that called in and worked me. I tried to send you a KB whenever I remembered, or had the time to push the other button. But I felt like activity was actually pretty strong. The only kind of area that I didn't really see a lot of was European traffic. So like if you guys were wondering over here on the West Coast why you weren't seeing, I wasn't seeing it either. There just wasn't a lot of guys on. I mean, there was all the sort of I call them repeat offenders and strong signals were there, but beyond that, I mean, it just wasn't a lot on 80 and 40 where I normally find them, and actually 20 was even really hard to work some of them on. So that's sort of just the one thing that I'll know. The other thing is that I felt like that there were a lot of people new to RTTY, and I'm not saying that to complain or anything, but there's a couple patterns you see. Like one is that they call into your frequency, you're running, and then they send you all their info at once, and you kind of know, like, well, okay, I'll just send them, my exchange, and then thank you, and try to get them out of the way and get to the next guy. But the truth is that means that they're not regular RTTY contesters. I mean, because otherwise they wouldn't do that. Which means that just my personal opinion is that they probably came over from FT8, which is great. That's good. We need more of those. In fact, last year when I did it from here in California, I actually got a few emails from people. Hey, you were my first RTTY contact ever, and I've been only doing FT8, that kind of thing. So I just, I'm just glad that we hopefully got a few more people out of it. And I would also say that like I said, the whole thing was a lot of fun. I really wanted to go after it. You know, I didn't know whether if Ed was going to go down or to Aruba or not. I just figured, you know what, I'll sit there and I'll put my all into it. It was just remote rigs and K3 twins. That's my setup. 2 computers. I normally have always tried to do it with 1, but I did 2 this year, and that worked out pretty well. I listened to both radios the whole time. I didn't have any audio switching at all. It was just it was, like I said, it was a whole lot of fun.
Bill, can I ask a question? Are you doing what on CW would be 2B SIQ, or are you just alternating
absolutely.
CQing or not?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm doing that constantly. I'm hitting F1 here and then hitting F1 on the other keyboard and just constantly trying to interleave a queue. So sometimes one of them will slow you down and the other person sadly gets left hanging for a second. And so really the key is just making sure the messages are similar length to transmit. I sat there with a stopwatch and I tuned it, made sure that they were pretty close, and it wasn't much more technical than that.
As far as new operators go, I noticed, even though I am a new operator myself, that there was a wide variety of formats that people answered. I mostly ran stations because it was easier to me with my primitive setup. And I got a lot of different formats of people sending their exchanges, and sometimes sending my call, sometimes sending theirs, sometimes sending both, sometimes putting it at the front and the end, or only at the end or only at the front. And there seemed to be a lot more variability than one gets in CW contesting.
Yeah, there is. There is. I think some of that stuff's really helpful when you have more than one person calling and you want to know who's who's actually coming back to you or who's coming. And sometimes I even have to send a repeat because I didn't have that stuff in there. I acknowledge that there were a few of those cases where, like, I didn't necessarily send. So one of these things that I also do is this call stacking thing. So I would send thank you, and then I'd start the next QSO right afterwards. And I had to, the key was to make that shorter. The other radio is gonna, get off time. And so I had to remove a bunch of stuff out of that. Sometimes I only send my call sign once. I have different macros for different lengths just to keep the timing right, because that's the key with 2B SIQ, is just making sure that when you interleave, that one side isn't longer than the other, which means that one of them gets stuck.
Right.
But there are standard formats though, and if people sort of follow them and abbreviate them, it works much better.
Let me ask a question. I noticed when people called me, usually they just gave their call sign, but often they said AE6YDE and then their call sign. Is that,
I don't know what
that advisable or not?
That's not, no, that's just somebody adding too much stuff. I don't know if that's the defaults and then when MM's default file or whatever. I mean, I also saw people sending 5NN too. That's terrible because you're switching between figures and numbers. So you don't want to do that either.
Yeah, and really that's obviously a bad idea. Okay, well, thank you very much. Let me turn it over to Bob, W1RH. And Bob and I were chatting about the issue of mults because Bob had a very good number of domestic mults, but not many DX. And he was sort of not complaining, but commiserating about that a little bit. Are you there, Bob? Bob, are you around? Oh, well, Bob said he would be, but in any event.
He's there, but
he's there.
Oh, you are? Okay.
I see him.
Bob?
He's there, but he's
Not muted, but there's no audio.
Okay. Well, let me ask if anybody else wants to comment on this. I noticed myself, I actually worked all 50 states in my primitive way, which was a lot of fun. And very little DX because I wasn't looking for Europe. And I guess, was that the key to working 50 or 60 countries?
No, I don't know. I mean, like, I just kept calling CQ. I wasn't really looking for anybody. The 2B SIQ, you won't suffer because you're mostly just CQing.
Well, let me ask any of the multi guys here who did work 50 to 60 countries, Tom or John, was it a lot of European DX or not much?
I wouldn't say a lot, but the European DX is critical to getting up to 60 countries. Mm-hmm. Without it, you're going to be down near 40.
Yeah, we're down near 15 or 20, which
or even less. Yeah,
is also possible, right? Okay.
Yeah. The European contacts in prevailing conditions, it's kind of hard to run Europe other than for some very limited windows. And you don't want to waste a lot of time, but you need the multipliers. You just need to get the one station in each country if you can.
Okay. Well, let's go on to, I have two fellows who are willing to talk about the combination of RTTY and digital. The first, Paul, W7IV, if you could comment on that and how that worked for you.
Yeah, and just to step back real briefly, I was complaining that I thought Europe was missing, 20, and I really felt it was bad, but I'm comparing the two logs, and I worked 48 countries last year and 55 this year, so I don't know. But it really seemed like a lot of simple Europeans just weren't there. I switched over to FT4 only because I've been bitching on Facebook and RTTY groups about FT8 being too slow, and there's so many non-participants. I made 200 and whatever it was, 266 queues. They were all on FT4. And I basically cleaned up in the evening on 40 and 80 before I took my nap. Cleaned up 40 in the morning before 20 was open. And then probably the last hour and a half out of the last 2 hours on 20 was the bulk of it. So it was pretty much just a cleanup mode. Pretty slow and painful, but at least there were enough guys on FT4. So the advantage for me, FT4, and I'm trying to keep my score way up for the club competition. Next year, I think I'll be happy to go back to RTTY only. I only got one malt out of those 266, and that was VE9. And so it wasn't super productive. It was about 50 an hour in each of the blocks that I kind of concentrated it into. But
Do you think it increased your score overall, Paul? Did it increase the score?
Yeah, it was, well, yeah, because RTTY was slowing down when I jumped over, and I added 30,000 points.
Okay.
How was the dupe rate?
Wasn't bad at all.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, because it's kind of monkey proof, if they don't have N1MM or something, they've got whatever they're running that they would normally run, and they get grayed out or whatever if you worked them before.
Well, they're certainly not doing it by hand with a J38 by hand and paper logging, that's for sure. So Hank, are you on, and can you comment also, W6SX?
I'm here. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, well, like Paul, I kind of just went over to FT to kind of see what was happening. I worked 13% of my contacts were FT4. I went to FT8 a couple times, and they weren't contesting in the FT8 system. So I just stayed with FT4. There was a fair amount of discussion and questioning before the contest of, hey, what frequencies should we use for FT during the contest? And no one ever really gave a good answer. So I just ended up using the standard FT4 subbands that Taylor loads into WSJTX, and I also only CQ'd. I didn't do any answering of CQing. So I CQ'd. I got 1 or 2 mults. For me, it was mostly just trying to figure out where the frequencies were. And as I say, they ended up just being the standard FT4 subbands. And I don't think it increased my score.
Oh, okay. You gonna do it again?
Maybe. I have a hope, a vision that I've had for three years or so, ever since Ed started WWDitchy. And that is that if we can somehow reach some critical mass in the FT areas, these guys will say, hey, contesting is fun. I'm going to try the other modes. So far, my vision has not been fulfilled.
Okay, well, continue to contest exuberantly, Hank. Yeah.
Deal.
Let me, I also asked two multi-operators, and the first was John, who already spoke a bit, but John, W6LD, you seem like you had a very minimally staffed M2, but I think Mike said in the write-up that you actually did in-band search and pouncing. I'm curious how you managed to do all that.
Well, so we started out actually pretty ambitious. We were hoping to do have 2 or maybe even 3 separate operations from the Stanford station, but because of illnesses and conflicts and one thing after another, we ended up with only 3 operators. So we decided to go in the multi-2 category, and we ended up having just 3 operators, and we had 10 hours, despite Mike got this a little wrong in the write-up. We had 10 hours approximately, and we only had 1 operator on duty. But we've got it set up because we have the real estate and this physical separation of antennas. We can run on an SO2R kind of setup. We can have 2 stations on the same band, and so you can be running on one station and S&Ping in the same band on another station. So that's what Mike refers to as the in-band S&P that we had going on, and that we did fairly continuously, except for the periods when rates were really high at the beginning. We had, by the way, we had very high hopes for FT8 or FT modes, in part because we're finding that the FT modes are very, they attract our student members and they really enjoy it, and it's really it's really accessible for them, because they do so much on computers. And we also saw that ND2T at K6MTU, which established the record in the multi-2 category last year, in 2 approximately 10-minute periods, they'd picked up 7 unique multipliers last year in the FT mode. And so we thought, well, we got to be there for those multipliers. It didn't turn out that way. We only picked up 1 multiplier in the FT mode. And I would say that we had a lot of difficulty switching between modes. We had something going on where we'd have to reboot write log in order to get write log to interface properly with the K3s after we'd switched modes, and that slowed and took us a long time to figure that out. And so that we probably lost 50 to 100 queues because of downtime, because of trying to switch between FT and RTTY. So that was a cost. But I think the second day in particular, it was productive to hit the FT4 subbands for 15, 20 minutes or so to pick up 20, 25 contacts, and then cycle back to RTTY, because the audience of available stations was limited. So you just work everyone who was there, and then you go on to in the same band, go back to the RTTY mode, and that was productive. Once we got it so that we could switch between RTTY and FT without a lot of downtime.
Okay, great. Thank you, John. Our last speaker, I know Dave's going to want me to move along here too, is Tom, who you mentioned, ND2T. Tom?
Yeah, here I am, folks. First, I want to thank everyone in the club for the cues. It's really great to work club stations. Every time I work somebody who gives me a VA, I say, uh-oh. And I love getting those KBs. Bill is absolutely right. It's nice to get a KB. It's nice to send one. By default, I don't send them as often as I used to. I don't think we do that as much as we used to, and I think we should go back to it. Our op was a story of teamwork and flexibility and perseverance. The station we used was the K6MTU station, which we're going to hear about at the next meeting. It's created by Kevin. It's up on Mount Umanum. The team was K6TD, Kevin, Mark, K6UFO, Ed, W0YK, who didn't go to Aruba, and me, ND2T. The same team, we're fresh off our world #1 multi-single finish in the FT Roundup only a month ago. And so we were kind of tired of FT, and we kind of planned not to go there unless the RTTY rates really went down. And in the event, we didn't go there. So this was a total RTTY operation. We were planning for multi-2 for this contest, but myself and Mark and Kevin all had different personal things happen that had to reduce our available hours. So we replanned for multi-single, and Ed W0YK offered and actually did multiple hours of SO2R listening on the second radio for mults. In this contest, if you're a multi-single, you can have 10 band changes per calendar hour. On Tuesday before the contest, our 40-meter Yagi, which is a 4-element JK at 110 feet, suddenly presented a 10-to-1 SWR. This is our money band for the nighttime, of course. On Thursday, W0YK went up to the station and added its unit to the 160-meter dipole so that we could run it on 40. Ed only lives 3 miles from the station as the crow flies, but there's no crow flying for him. It takes him over an hour to drive.
A long 3 miles by car.
That's right. It's a long 3 miles by car. So that was he gets a medal for that. We had a goal of 1,500 Qs. We did 1,495 by 114 for 170K. Like I say, they were all ready, all remote, all ready. And if you're interested, the 40-meter Yagi is back. Hector came on Friday. He climbed up there. The balun, because of vibration of the toroids in the balun, the conductor, the wire from the center conductor of the center conductor of the socket to the toroid had come loose and was gone. So he fixed that and he put hot snot on the toroids, which is going to keep them, we think, from vibrating.
What brand balun, Tom?
You know, I should know that, but
Was it
Test.
Was it a JK?
No.
No. Okay.
He had a balun designs with my JK antennas, and it had a couple failures.
I think it may be balun designs. I don't know because I didn't see it. So anyhow, Andy, this team is going to be back for the NAQP RTTY.
Okay, super. Okay, I think we better move along. Thank you all. I appreciate that. And it sounds like Bob W1RH is back actually too. So thanks for joining us back, Bob. I got to move along to the subject. We promised Carl that we get him on pretty soon. Can you go to the next slide, Dave? Thank you very much for the comments of those who spoke. I appreciate it. Okay, this weekend we had a lot of fun in NAQP CW, those of us that were on. Our team number 1, as you can see, did very well. We had 6.5 teams roughly. And now our, wait, I said 876. I think I may mean 676. In any event, we did well. We're in 4th place among what I call the local teams. Local I define as those of a locality and a group, because NAQP allows teams to be spread out from all over the place. I don't really count them, but it was a fun contest. It was a great multi-2 score as well from N6RO that I have noted there. And the most interesting thing, and that's what I want to talk about now, we'll get back to the results later, probably next month, is the assisted issue. Go to the next slide, please. For the first time, NAQP has an assisted class. And so the question always was going to be, what is going to happen with assisted versus unassisted? And here I did a quick calculation for the 3830 reports. And as you can see, I took median scores. In general, mults were way up this year because 10 meters was open for one thing, and 15 was open for quite a bit. As you can see, looking at the top 40 scores, the median mults were up by 4% for those who went assisted. The median Qs were down by 12%, and the median score was down by 7%. Now, I had hypothesized that the median scores would go up because in sweepstakes, assisted people generally do worse than unassisted. And I think the reason is that in sweepstakes, although you can find contacts with the internet, you don't really find mults because the top scores get all the mults anyway. But NAQP is time limited. You only have a certain amount of time on each band and the malts count per band. And therefore, I had assumed that being much more efficient, getting malts would be very, very important, would help your score. And maybe it will. It kind of remains to be seen how this is going to shake out. And actually go to the next slide. Looking only at the top 10 scores, it's kind of interesting. You see the same effect. The scores are actually down. And these are guys who are really good in both categories. People like AA3B and assisted who do it every week, 3 times a week on the CWTs and are terrific at it. But the same general result, even among the very top scorers. And it may be that there's a little too much time spent chasing malts because you obviously get more malts. On the other hand, the time you spend chasing them, you're not doing something else. So let's go to the next slide. And I did a quick comparison on our team. Jim, K9YC, and I had very similar scores. We're both a little above 200,000 K. But as you can see, I had 150 or so more contacts than he did. But Jim had an astounding mult total of 259, which is really astonishing, frankly. And I couldn't believe it. Looking at on 80 meters particularly, I was operating SO2R, trying to see Q always, and then looking for malts on the other radio. And sometimes on 80, I would go back and do a sweep. And I'll be darned if I just didn't hear anything like 58 malts. I didn't even come close. As I was mentioning earlier, I hardly heard any 4s, amazingly. And Jim found an astonishing number of multipliers. And Jim, I think you're on. I'd like to hear what your strategy was, and particularly on 80, how you got 58 malts, because that's really an astounding number to me. Are you there, Jim?
Yeah, you hearing me okay?
Yes, yes.
Okay. Yeah, well, it's the result of a lot of things. When I'm in a club focus contest, I'm always running assistant. So I have a lot of experience doing that. I'm doing a combination of SO2R and just dedicated search and pounce sometimes. So when the running station is not getting action, I'll just go totally on for search and pounce. And when you do that with assisted, you can make some very nice rates, search and pounce. Now I have N1MM set up, so I'm looking at available malts all the time, and I sort them generally geographically, so I can tell, you know, what's left and so on. And there are malts that I will watch for and just very quickly go grab them as soon as I see them. I'm there. The other the thing, of course, my station is pretty strong on 80. Mm-hmm. I've got 2 elements on 80 going east at about 120 feet, so that helps.
Yeah. I think you beat me out a couple times actually in pileups on 80.
Yeah, well, it's not a lot of gain. I get a couple of dB out of it, but a couple of dB is a couple of dB. Mm-hmm. I think the key is to realize that when you're trying to run and nothing's happening, you're better off dedicating a lot of energy to S&P. But I was always concentrating on mults. At the same time I was running, if I would spot a mult on the same band, I'd finish a queue and go grab him right away. Yeah. Or, but propagation, of course, as you know, was quite variable. It was really stinko early in the evening, and it got much better later. Mm-hmm. A lot of QRN. So yeah. I guess that's what I can say about it.
Okay.
If you want to hear a few comments, I was the 80 meter op at N6RO. I think I got 56 malts. When it first became possible here, I realized that I couldn't CQ, and I concentrated exclusively on malts. And a lot of those malts that I got in the first hour and a half, they were not available later. This was like, get it goddamn now, or they're gone. And so I focused on malts at the beginning for, I'd say the first hour and a half. I was really focused on that. And a lot of those malts were just not there later.
Yeah.
And I found that there were some mults, they'd show up, and some of these guys on the East Coast, Rhode Island, I lost, they were CQing, and I'm chomping at the bit, and we're on 160 meters, and I can't call this guy for 5 minutes, and by the time my 5 minutes came, he was QRT.
That happens. Thank you, Matt.
I think
Okay, I'm
that
going
was
to
it.
move on.
Sorry.
We're just about done. I appreciate it. Thank you very much, Jim. And then congratulations again. That is a fantastic
Yeah.
malt total.
I want to emphasize one thing that Matt mentioned, exactly right. When I first go on a band, I'll search and pounce malts. Every malt I see, I'll grab it. Exactly what Matt is saying. It's the same deal.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I have a strategy too, where like, say I'm on 20 and we're going to go to 40, but it's late afternoon at a time when I can't really run. But on the second radio, by the time I do go to 40, I will have worked about 20 malts typically, just by, they can hear me, but I can't run. And it's the same kind of thing, I think. Let's go on. I have 2 more slides and then I'll turn it back over to Carl. This is fantastic here. Compare ND7K, who had 4 operators, including N6MJ and KI6RRN. They had in-band search and pounce stations on 2 bands at a time. They operated 12 hours. They have 149 elements in the air. And they got 2,781 Qs, which is a terrific total. And look at Steve, N2IC. This is the most amazing result ever. He's 1 op with 2 radios, 10 hours, no internet. He has 29 elements. He told me this. I asked him. And he comes within 500 Qs of those 4 guys. I mean, this to me, this score on the right hand, in fact, his 620 beat our top 3 operators on team 1 combined. It's truly an amazing result. So I just wanted to throw that out. It's an incredible thing that Steve accomplished here. And I think this has to be a record for single op NAQP. I cannot imagine anybody's come close. Certainly no one did last year. Okay, next slide. Fun fact. Most common, ND7K did a list of names of all things. So when I saw this list, I thought from my own experience, somehow it seemed to me that Mike was the most common name. Just shout out what you think is the most common name here, anybody? I say Mike. Anyone?
Bob.
Okay, Bob. Anyone else?
Jim.
Bob.
Bob?
Mike.
Yeah. Mike? Okay.
Or John.
Or John. Okay, well, go to the next slide.
I say Bob.
Okay, well, don't say it too loud. Turns out it was Jim. I was quite surprised actually to see that, but that's at ND7K. That's their list. Okay, next slide. Upcoming contests. The NAQP SSB, as I said, Skip is going to be our flogger. It's next Saturday. I hope we get some good team spirit. That's a fun, very, very friendly contest for those of you who are dedicated CW ops. But because in NAQP, once you work somebody, you know their name and it's easy to make contacts again, even if you barely hear them. So people greet you by name and it's very pleasant, I find, as phone contests go. CQ160, the CW sprints coming up in February, and then the ARL DX as well. Anyway, that concludes the report. Dave, thank you for indulging my time. And Carl, I hope you're still there for your presentation. So back to you, Dave.
I'm still here.
Okay,
Yeah, okay.
great.
Well, thanks, Andy. Yeah, I'm going to turn it right over to Carl and thank him for coming and agreeing to do this. Really appreciate it, and we're all looking forward to it. So, without further ado, K9LA.
Okay, thank you, Dave. Yeah, I've been watching the Rams Cardinals game, so not a problem. And good evening to everyone there in the Northern California Contest Club. I noticed a lot of calls that I worked in NAQP CW just a couple days ago. And thanks everyone for the cues here. Let me get my, whoops, hit the wrong button there. Okay, where is it? Right there it is, share screen. Okay, share. Okay, let me know when you see the full screen. It's full screen for me now.
Yep, there it is.
There we go.
Okay. Well, the title is Cycle 25 and Propagation. And I'm Carl K9LA in Fort Wayne, Indiana. We're on the Eastern time zone. We're pretty far west in the Eastern time zone, but we're still Eastern, so that's okay. I was enjoying watching the football game. So that little sketch on the left says Cycle 25 is waking up, and I think being a contest club, I'm sure you guys are aware of that. I'm going to talk about previous solar cycles, Cycle 25 predictions, propagation predictions, short-term opportunities, talk about space weather, real-time assessment of the bands, and disturbances to propagation and possible mitigation. So let's get started. Here's a plot of all previous 24 solar cycles, the maximum smooth sunspot number that it achieved. Cycle 1 began in 1755. No, I wasn't around back then. Whatever. You're probably familiar with the Maunder minimum. That was 1645 to 1715 with very few sunspots. Now, what's very obvious from that Excel plot is we've gone through 3 periods of big solar cycles. Cycles 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right here, they were pretty big. And then cycles 8, 9, 10, 11 were big. And cycles 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23 was kind of big. Of course, what's also obvious is we've been through 2 periods of small solar cycles, 5, 6, and 7. They had some pretty small ones. Cycles 12, 13, 14, 15, and 16 were relatively small. And of course, cycle 24, the last one, was small. It's the smallest one in our lifetimes. And it's the 4th smallest in our recorded history. So the big question is, will cycle 25 get us out of this 3rd period of small solar cycles? And I just annotated some of the solar cycles. Of course, cycle 19, the biggest, largest in recorded history. Cycle 21 was a pretty big, moderate cycle. Cycle 23 was kind of average. And again, cycle 24 was small. So cycle 25 predictions. I'm aware of 56 predictions for cycle 25. Why are there so many? Because we don't fully understand the processes that generates sunspots. We know it has to do with how the magnetic fields move inside the sun and how plasma flows inside the sun. But the nitty-gritty details are not yet fully clear. And what that causes is many different methods are used to make a prediction. There's a precursor method. We'll look at one of those in a little bit. Spectral analysis and a bunch of others. And on the right, there's a little sketch of one of the many methods. Just flip a coin. Cycle 24 had somewhere around 50 predictions. So we haven't learned enough yet to understand what's going on inside the sun so that our predictions aren't all over the map. So here's a distribution of those 56 predictions that I'm aware of. What I've done is broken the range into buckets of smooth sunspot number. For example, there's 15 predictions for a smooth sunspot number of between 100 and 124. That's also where cycle 24 ended up. And if you add up, starting at the left, you'll see that 50 of those 56 predictions, that's 89%, are for a below average cycle. The red annotation, that's where an average cycle falls. That's where cycle 23 fell. There are 3 for an average cycle, and there are 3 for a larger than average cycle. And I'll just remind you that the average cycle is a smooth sunspot number of 179. So Dr. Scott McIntosh and colleagues have gotten lots of publicity for their prediction for a big cycle 25. So their initial prediction was in June of 2020, and they predicted a maximum smooth sunspot number of 229, plus or minus 25. So there was a little, some error bars around it. And the dashed line points to the bucket way on the right there. And that would be pretty similar to cycles 21 and 22, which provided excellent 10 meters and 6 meter F2 propagation for several years. But in August 2021, Dr. McIntosh and his colleagues revised their prediction down to 195 plus or minus 17. If you follow the dashed line from that bullet, it goes to the average bucket. So right now they're predicting an average bucket, or an averaged solar cycle, which fits into the average bucket. So good question, is there going to be another revision of their prediction? So here's the NOAA-NASA prediction for cycle 25. On the left is cycle 24. The purple data is smoothed 10.7 centimeter solar flux. The black is the monthly mean. The monthly mean is kind of spiky, so that's why there's further averaging to make it a smooth number. And of course, the plot is a lot smoother. And it's pretty easy to see that cycle 24 had 2 peaks. And that's due to the fact that the 2 solar hemispheres aren't working in concert. One is dominant for a while, then the other one's dominant for a while. I don't think we know enough to predict if cycle 25 is going to have 2 peaks, but cycle 23 and 22 did. We'll have to wait and see. The red line is their prediction. You can see they're saying solar maximum probably will occur sometime in 2025. The green annotation, we are here, that's where we are at the end of 2021. And the green horizontal bars are what the 10.7 centimeter solar flux needs to be for a number of weeks before we have those 2 bands open on a daily basis. We're not there yet on 15, and we're farther away on 10 meters. But there's some other good news that, of course, keeps things running, and that's, well, we'll get to that in a little bit. I put this slide in tonight because there's something weird about their prediction. If you look at their red line, it appears to start in May of 2020, which that doesn't make sense because the sunspot number between cycles 24 and 25 minimized in December 2019. So for some reason, it looks like their prediction is moved 5 months to the right. I'm not sure what's going on. I sent an email to them, but I haven't heard back yet. And of course, this 5-month shift to the right makes it look like cycle 25 is ahead of the prediction. And you've probably seen those words on spaceweather.com and maybe the Space Weather Prediction Center website. So something's going on funny. Okay. So here's a prediction from a precursor method. And a precursor just means something before the new cycle starts tells us how big it's going to be. Now, historical data suggests that the longer we're at solar minimum, the smaller the next cycle will be. And that's the plot on the left. You can see there's a decent trend, but it's not a perfect correlation. There's still, the data points are still scattered about the red linear trend line. So it kind of says, well, if we spend a lot of time at solar minimum, it's probably going to be a small solar cycle. So let's take a look at the length of solar minimums all the way back to between cycle 18 and 19. On the left, those 5 colored curves are the solar minimum between cycles 18 and 19 all the way through cycle 22 and 23. And what it says is, by my definition of solar minimum, when the smooth sunspot number is below 20, it says we only spent about 2 years at solar minimum, 24 months or so. So we got pretty used to short solar minimums. But then along came the minimum between 23 and 24. That's the green curve. And it went out to almost 5 years. Now, what happened? The minimum between 23 and 24 was almost 5 years. Cycle 24 came out pretty darn small. The red line is the minimum so far between cycles 24 and 25, and it's going to be a little bit longer than the previous solar minimum. So that kind of suggests that cycle 25 is going to be small too. And that kind of agrees with the general consensus from the solar scientist community. So all that talk about predictions is fun and all that, but real data is what tells us what's going on. So how is cycle 25 doing? This plot shows the smooth sunspot number for cycle 24. That's the green plot, the green curve. Cycle 23 is the orange curve. And cycle 21, which was a big solar cycle, is the blue curve. The red is the cycle 25 progress to date. And it's pretty obvious that cycle 25 appears to be tracking the small cycle 24. It's nowhere near an average cycle or a big cycle yet. Now, there's always hope that something interesting will happen. But the longer cycle 25 tracks cycle 24, I think that's going to tell us that cycle 25 is going to be another small one. Now, I've talked about smooth sunspot number a number of times. So what is a smooth sunspot number? Well, here's a picture of cycle 23. And the red data is the daily sunspot number. You can see it's very spiky. It'd be hard to tell what's going on in a solar cycle. So what do? Well, we take a month's worth of daily data and average it, and that's a monthly mean or monthly average. That's the blue data. You can see it's less spiky, but still, it's kind of tough. So we further average by taking the running average of 12 monthly means. And that's the smooth sunspot number. You can see that all those spikes are averaged out. That's a very smooth curve. It, of course, shows that cycle 23 also had 2 peaks. And this is one of the reasons to use smooth values. It gives us a better picture of a solar cycle. There's a big second reason too. It's because our propagation predictions were developed based on the correlation between a smooth value, smooth sunspot number, smooth 10.7 centimeter solar flux, and monthly median ionospheric parameters. Median means a 50% probability. So that says that our propagation predictions aren't daily predictions. They are statistical over a month's time frame. And that's because we don't fully understand all the things that are going on to cause the F2 region to vary. So let's just look at kind of the concept of a propagation prediction. When we input a smooth sunspot number, the 2 outputs we usually look at are the maximum usable frequency, the MUF, and a signal strength or a signal power. Again, they are monthly median values. They have a distribution about them. So on the top is let's say the propagation prediction program said the monthly median MUF is predicted to be 20 megahertz. Since that's a 50% probability, that means on 50% of the days of the month, or 15 days of the month, the MUF will be at least 20 megahertz. On a couple days of the month on the left there, the MUF will be higher. Now, if you're on the band on those couple good days, then you'll work stuff that you didn't think you could work. Of course, on most of the days of the month, the MUF is lower. And the same thing applies to signal strength. For example, monthly median S7 signal strength could be greater on a couple days in the month. And for all the days of the month, it's going to be lower. So just remember, our predictions are statistical in nature over a month's time frame. We don't have daily predictions yet. There's good reason for that. That's a whole nother story. Now, slide 7 indicated that 15 meters might not be open on a daily basis until late 2022, early 2023. Here's where we can thank the sun for having spikes in the 10.7 centimeter solar flux and in the sunspot number. These spikes can give us short-term openings. So here's a plot from that URL in blue there at the top right, solon.info/solar. It's from January 4th, 2021 to January 4th, 2022, a good year's worth of data. The black line is the daily 10.7 centimeter solar flux. You can see in the first half of the year, things were pretty quiet. And then the 10.7 centimeter solar flux started spiking. And that's because cycle 25 has started its ascent. The red data is the daily sunspot number. Again, most of the spikiness is at the second half of 2021. And it's because cycle 25 has started its ascent. You can see towards the end of the year, there was a very nice spike in the 10.7 centimeter solar flux in the sunspot number, and that occurred around CQ IDX CW contest. And propagation on the higher bands was really good. But then again, things settled back down to more of a solar minimum type condition as cycle 25 has just been kind of slow to get going. Now, what about space weather? There's lots of parameters out there, lots of websites. What I generally like to look at is the N0 NBH banner. And you see that just about everywhere. This is the one from QRZ.com. And what I've done is put in gold boxes those parameters that I think are important. Now, those parameters, there's 6 of them. They fall into 2 big buckets. The top 3 bullets, they can tell us how much F2 region ionization there is. And that's the solar flux index, the sunspot number, and that MUF US boulder. That's a very good one. It's the MUF, assuming the boulder ionosonde is the midpoint of a 3,000 kilometer path. And Boulder's pretty much the midway between the Midwest and California. So that's a good indication of what propagation could be. And you can see on the day I pulled that, 23 November last year at 2219, the MUF at Boulder was 22.65 megahertz, which said there should have been a 15-meter path between the Midwest and California. So that's a good one to look at. It's real-time data, and it includes the effect of geomagnetic storms, coronal holes, and everything. Now, the bottom 3 bullets, they can tell us if the F2 region is disturbed. Generally, that means that the MUF is going to be lower. The K index is a 3-hour index, and it tells how disturbed the Earth's magnetic field is. If you take the 8 daily 3-hour K indices and average them over a day, that's the A index. So the K index is a little more current index of what's going on. BZ, that's the Z component of the interplanetary magnetic field, the sun's magnetic field. And it tells us how well the interplanetary magnetic field is coupling to the Earth's magnetic field. When the coupling is good, that's not good for us. The Z component is perpendicular to the ecliptic. The ecliptic is the plane in which the Earth goes around the sun. So if it's perpendicular to the ecliptic, it's pretty much north-south, which is kind of what the Earth's magnetic field is. So you can see why the Z component is important to look at. And SW is the solar wind. And I should mention that those three bullets at the top, they're all kind of correlated. And the three bullets in the bottom are correlated. Now, what do we want? Well, in general, we desire certain values of the solar flux and the sunspot number. For the solar flux, when we see it greater than 90 for a long period, 15 meters ought to be open on a daily basis. Similarly, if it gets up to 120 on a long-term basis, we should see 10 meters open on a daily basis. And we can translate those numbers into sunspot numbers, and there they are. Of course, the MUF-US boulder tells us if the band of interest is good for a path between the Midwest and California. For paths east-west paths a little bit farther north, the MUF will be a little bit lower. For east-west paths a little bit farther south, the MUF will be a little bit higher. So you can kind of judge what the continental propagation is using that MUF-US boulder value. Generally, we'd like the K index to be less than or equal to 3. We'd like BZ to be positive or slightly negative. When it gets very high negative, like negative 50 to 100, negative 100, that means the interplanetary magnetic field is coupling into the Earth's magnetic field, and that's not good. And we'd like the solar wind to be not too much greater than 400 kilometers per second. Now, there's some subjective calls on band conditions, and you can take those with a grain of salt and just kind of note it in the back of your head. Now, if you don't want to mess with predictions or with all that space weather data, of course, you can just go to dxmaps.com. You can select a view. I've selected world in the picture on the right, and I've selected 15 meters. And on November 23rd, 2021, between 2213 and 2300 UTC, that's what other people were working on, 15 meters. You can see that North America had some good pass into South America, into the Pacific, into Japan. 2213 and 2300. It's getting kind of late to Europe. If I would have looked earlier, I'm sure I would have seen lots of contacts between North America and Europe. Now, there are other methods that give us this information. PSK Reporter, WhisperNet, the reverse beacon network, where you transmit in a certain format, then you can go listen to SDRs, software-defined radios around the world, and see where your signal ended up. That's pretty much real time. And of course, the Northern Cal DX Foundation beacons on 20, 17, 15, 12, and 10 are very valuable. In a 3-minute period with those 18 beacons around the world, you can tell what a band is doing worldwide. And there's software to go with it too, so you don't have to generally sit there and copy it. VE3NEA makes something called Pharos, which will do a great analysis of those beacons, and lots of good information comes out of that if you're interested in more of the details of propagation. Okay, disturbances to propagation. I threw these slides in today also, and there are 3 disturbances to propagation as defined by NOAA. The first is a geomagnetic storm. Looking at the top left text, generally that results in decreased F2 region MUFs. It can possibly enhance the F2 region MUFs at low latitudes. It affects both day and night the day and night ionosphere, and that's where those two arrows are pointing to day and night. Also, on the lower right, a geomagnetic storm also causes increased auroral ionization causing possible VHF paths. It causes increased absorption and possible horizontal refraction. In other words, a skewed path on MF, on medium freaks and high frequencies. The second disturbance is a solar radiation storm. That's from a big solar flare like a M class or X class. It can increase D region absorption in the polar cap, both day and night. That's kind of important for you guys because your path to Europe is kind of pretty much through the auroral zone and across the polar cap. A third disturbance is a radio blackout. That's also caused by a big solar flare, and it's increased absorption on the daylight side of Earth. And it depends on frequency. The lower frequencies are worse. So that's a big picture of disturbances to propagation, when and where they occur. And let's take a look at when do these disturbances occur. On the left is a typical solar cycle. You can see where solar max is B, solar min is A and C. And coronal mass ejections, which is a geomagnetic storm, they're most prevalent around solar maximum. Okay. Big solar flares are most prevalent around solar maximum also. So solar radiation storms and radio blackouts are generally around solar maximum, but they can occur anywhere throughout a solar cycle. Now, coronal holes, that's just a hole in the sun's corona. They're most prevalent during the decline of a solar cycle. And what all that says is the quietest time of a solar cycle is during its ascent. And that's kind of where we are right now. So take advantage of it. It's interesting to look at the plot of the A index. The A index, of course, is the tells us how disturbed the Earth's magnetic field is on a daily basis. And it maximizes at solar maximum, and it maximizes even higher during the decline due to solar holes. So lots of stuff going on, and it's kind of interesting to understand some of it. Now, during a contest, what happened? What can you do if you have a disturbance to propagation? So here's some possible mitigation. Your mileage may vary. For example, for a geomagnetic storm, that's when we see elevated K indices. It generally causes decreased ionization in the F2 region. And the cause is a coronal mass ejection, most prevalent at solar max, or a coronal hole, most prevalent during a declining phase. So what can you do if that happens? Well, you can QSY to lower frequencies. You can look for short-term enhancements on the lower latitude paths. You can look for skewed paths on the low bands. And you can look for aurora at VHF if you're doing a VHF contest. Solar radiation storms. That's when we see significantly increased proton flux in the solar wind. That's because a big solar flare can eject energetic protons, relativistic protons, in fact. The result is increased D region absorption in the polar cap. And the cause is a big M or X class flare. So what's the mitigation? Well, take a look the other way around. For example, if you're going across the northern polar cap and that short path to Europe, take a look long path. The polar cap down south may not have the same problem. Of course, you have to wonder if the MUF is high enough to go long path, but it's worth taking a look. Finally, radio blackout. Significantly increased radiation at X-ray wavelengths, and it causes increased D-region absorption on the daylight side of the Earth. It causes also big solar flares. So what's the mitigation for that? Well, QSY to higher frequencies. That's because there's less absorption as frequency increases. And also look at paths in darkness if possible. So there's some ideas. I can't guarantee they'll work, but give them a try the next time you're in a contest and either the K index goes up or we have increased proton flux in the solar wind, or there's increased radiation at X-ray wavelengths. And of course, if you go to NOAA website or the Space Weather Prediction Center's website, right at the top on the homepage, they'll tell you what's going on in terms of geomagnetic storms, solar radiation storms, and radio blackouts. So you know, hey, there's something happening, or nah, there's nothing happening. So here's a summary. Cycle 25 is definitely ascending. Predictions are interesting, but actual data trumps predictions. And so far, the data suggests another small cycle, but we just have to wait and see what happens. Solar maximum, probably around mid-2025. If the rate of ascent increases, then solar max will be here a little bit earlier. And that means 15 meters will be back on a daily basis a little bit sooner, and 10 meters will also. Use space weather data or dxmaps.com to get an idea of what propagation is right now. And of course, watch for spikes in the sunspot number and the 10.7 centimeter solar flux. Just remember, those two are proxies for extreme ultraviolet radiation, which is the radiation that ionizes the atmosphere to give us the F2 region. But there's a decent correlation between extreme ultraviolet and our typical sunspot number and 10.7 centimeter solar flux. Just a reminder, if cycle 25 is small, we still should have a couple years of great worldwide propagation with modest power and modest antennas on the higher bands. We had it for cycle 24, so it's likely to be there for cycle 25. And all I can end with is just get radioactive on HF. And I know you guys are just listening to all your contest results. So that's mostly for any newbies you got in your club. You know, think about it. If someone's been licensed for only 5 years, they kind of wonder, yeah, all right, what's so great about 15, 12, and 10 meters? All it is mostly is noise. Well, in a couple of years, they're going to find out that, hey, things are really going to be pretty exciting. So that's all I had. If there are any questions, I can certainly try and answer them.
Carl, what do you think about the 6 meter propagation?
Well, cycle 24 around solar max in the fall and winter months did have 6 meter F2 propagation. So it's certainly possible cycle 25, although it's similar to 24, will also have it. If cycle 25 is bigger, that's just a better possibility. But certainly take a look around solar maximum in the fall and winter. And of course, if you see the solar flux and the sunspot number take a big spike, that also suggests that there may be some 6 meter openings because of some enhancement in the lower latitude ionization. And of course, if you're in a month like December with some sporadic E, you could have some good links down to VKZL. I know Christmas Eve a couple of years ago had a great opening between the States and VKZL. Of course, sporadic E is pretty much there every year, regardless of where we are in a solar cycle. So expect another good season of sporadic E on 6 meters. I think it was, well, the East Coast certainly had a good season. As you move farther west, it wasn't as good, but there were openings. So, of course, the way to catch those openings are, be at the radio.
K9YC with a question, Carl.
Sure.
We get some monster openings to JA on 6 meters. Thinking about the distances involved and the duration, it's hard to conceive of that as being all multi-hop E. I've seen some of these openings be a couple hours.
Yeah.
Yep. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, K6MIO, Jim Kennedy has written about long distance 6 meter propagation. And so I suggest Googling K6MIO, and there's sporadic E. It could be some kind of chordal hopping. What was the JA that proposed that short past summer solstice propagation, which was really due to polar summer mesospheric echoes? There can be enough ionization to do that, and that's across the higher latitude pass. So there's some interesting possibilities. I don't think we'll ever exactly know what happened. The best thing we can do is just try and correlate the contacts to the probabilities of the physical mechanisms for the different propagation modes and see which one matches best. Yeah, I can't give you a definite answer, Jim.
Okay. Another question that has been discussed on the VHF Slack channel. There's a guy out in LA, I think NX6T, but I'm not sure about that, who has, he's got some weather background, and he has promoted a theory that sporadic E is somehow related to turbulence in the upper atmosphere.
Well, are you talking about Larry, N6NC? He's down in.
I don't think so, but whatever the idea.
Yeah, I think he operates at NX6T. He's in San Diego. Well, it's really not him. There are two other fellows, Jim Bacon, G3YLA. He's a retired meteorologist with the BBC, and he's done a lot of investigating of the jet stream and other disturbances that look like they enhance the chance of sporadic E. He has a forecast every day of the sporadic E prediction index, and you can see how that seems to correlate with what's actually going on. If you Google G3YLA, you'll find a lot. Also K1YOW, he took a look at sporadic E in the winter months, and there seems to be a lot of correlation between that terrestrial weather and sporadic E, specifically wind shear because of the jet stream and other events that cause a disturbance in the troposphere that propagates up to the E region. So there's a lot of work going on, and it's pretty interesting. Our understanding of sporadic E is not complete, and it looks like there's more than we realized.
So the first call you mentioned is having a daily prediction about this?
Yeah, G3YLA, Jim Bacon.
Well, there was somebody stateside though, I think, that you mentioned.
K1YOW.
Okay,
He had an article in, his article appeared in CQ. I tell you what, I'm going to send you guys a PDF of this presentation and I'll put some of those URLs on for you.
wonderful. Thank you, Carl.
Yep.
I have a question. Can you say something about backscatter and how it relates to MUF? If it does.
Yeah, it's, you know, sometimes we may think of the ionosphere as being very homogeneous and smooth, but it's not. It's lumpy. And there are irregularities in the ionosphere that can cause, you know, backscatter, forward scatter, side scatter. And it's a great way to work short distances on the higher bands, especially if you're running some power. My wife is Vicky AE9YL, and she needed to work Michigan on 15 meters, which pretty darn close to Fort Wayne. So she got a hold of K8CC in Michigan, big contest station. Dave, he's a silent key, I believe now, and she had no trouble working them. So yeah, scatters due to irregularities in the ionosphere, they're always there. And sometimes if you're in the right place at the right time, you can achieve a goal.
I have a question. Could you maybe say a little bit more about the A and K indices and exactly what those things mean? They're always posted on WWV, and I have a little hard time understanding what those numbers are actually going to translate into observed propagation.
Okay. Well, I can just give you some general, you know, what we try to do is make simple statements about very complicated processes that are going on up in the ionosphere and the atmosphere. But in general, okay, the K index is where it all starts. What people do is monitor the Earth's magnetic field over a 3-hour period, determine what the maximum excursion was, and then they translate that into a number between 0 and 9. 0 meaning the magnetic field was very quiet. 9 means, man, there was a very big excursion in the data. The data is taken by a magnetometer. So every 3 hours, a number comes out to state how active the Earth's magnetic field is. And the higher the K index, in general, the worse the propagation. And that's about as far as I can take it. As I said earlier, the A index is just the average of the 8 3-hour K indices. So it gives a broader picture as opposed to a you know, just a 3-hour window. It gives a daily window. Most of the time you should be watching the K index.
Yeah,
because that tells us more what's going on right now.
yeah. I in general, I get it. Yeah, higher K equals bad.
Yeah, yep.
And the thing too is that they talk about mid latitude, high latitude, whatever of these different. How come the K varies depending upon latitude, and what the hell does that mean for me?
Well, it shouldn't vary too much, because what they try to do is make sure the K index is applicable to stations at all the latitudes. And it's not perfect, but in general, if there's you know, the Boulder K index is 3. If you go to a low latitude, it should also be darn close to 3. And if you go to high latitude, it should be close to 3. Because they want the K index to indicate how active the magnetic field is regardless of latitude. So that kind of, what they start with is measuring the magnetic field in nanoteslas. And the high latitude stations have a much higher range of nanoteslas for a given K index compared to a low latitude station. But they try and work that all out. So, you know, a K of 7 means the same thing regardless of where you are in the world.
Huh. Okay.
It's not a, you know, it's, there are exceptions, of course.
Well, yeah, I'm sure there's like a billion exceptions.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it.
There's just so much about this that we just don't understand really about exactly what the sun is doing internally.
Yeah, like I said, we're trying to make simple statements about very complicated processes that maybe we don't fully understand everything yet.
Well, at the end of the day, turn the radio on and see what you can do.
That's right. That's right. Or go to dxmaps.com and see who's working who. And if there's nothing, turn the radio off.
Well, I don't know about that. Maybe you're going to be one of the guys that work somebody, but yeah, I like DX Maps. That's a good tool.
Yep.
And PSK Reporter is awfully valuable as well.
Yep.
What's that one?
PSK Reporter. It reports all of the WSJT modes.
Right.
Okay.
Yep.
So essentially the WSJT operating software is configured to automatically report to PSK Reporter. So you can query it in an awful lot of very useful ways. You can see you and see where you're getting heard, or you can look for all the QSOs on a given band in the last 15 minutes, all sorts of things.
Mm-hmm. There's lots of data available, isn't there?
Yeah, the trick is to turn the data into information.
Right.
That's
right.
the problem.
Yep.
Carl, is there any speculation connection between noctilucent clouds and propagation?
Well, you know, noctilucent clouds are tied to the polar mesosphere summer echoes. They kind of go hand in hand, but they're at slightly different altitudes in the up there in the atmosphere. And I believe our understanding right now is that the polar mesosphere summer echoes, PMSE, are the ones that can refract our energy back to Earth, which kind of says the noctilucent clouds, NLC, are just visible and not too good for radio purposes. But a little bit higher up, you get the polar mesosphere summer echoes, and those are the ones that may have something to do with 6-meter propagation and who knows what else.
Carl, can you show slide 17 again? I have a question.
Sure.
Back, yeah, there you go. So this picture shows something that looks kind of familiar, where you see this oval, and it gets fatter in one side, and is that where the sun is currently shining, or is it?
No, the thickest part of the oval, the auroral oval, the thickest part of the auroral oval is towards the midnight sector.
Okay.
That's why it's dark there.
Mm-hmm.
And the sun is basically on a line from the thickest part through the X, which is the North Geomagnetic Pole, into daylight.
Okay, thanks.
Hey, Carl, could you talk a little bit more about skew paths? That's something our old timers can sometimes sort of predict, certain openings and things. Well, you need to turn your antenna such direct. It said something about it having to do with diffraction. That sounded interesting.
Yeah, well, a long time ago, I wrote an article for CQ about VE6, I think it was Whiskey Zulu, worked SM5 AGD on 160. Normally, the Great Circle path is, northeast from California. He pointed his antenna to the east. And when SM5, I think it was AGD, was queried, instead of pointing in his normal direction, he was pointed more southerly. So it seems like that because the K index was elevated on that night, that the normal Great Circle path wasn't available, probably because of disturbed conditions, but there was some kind of refraction or reflection off the auroral ionization that allowed the QSO to happen. And that's occurred quite a number of times. I can remember when W4ZV was in W0 land, he was W0ZV, he reported some of those skewed paths also. And of course, I think gray line propagation is a skewed path. Skewed meaning it's not following a Great Circle route. And there are reasons for that. And all you have to do is look at, especially on the low bands, what's absorption doing? How much ionospheric absorption is reducing the signal on the Great Circle path? So it must be going some other way. And of course, there are lots of examples, and that results in the old axiom, point your antenna southwest at sunrise on the low bands and southeast at sunset on the low bands. And what that is basically a pseudo long path into Southeast Asia and those areas. Lots of interesting things can happen. And if you've got a directional antenna, of course, then you can tell when that's happening. If you just got a vertical, well, you don't know what's going on.
Carl, why is the auroral oval an oval at all when you might expect that the electron precipitation would be centered at the geomagnetic pole?
Well, the electrons that are precipitating don't come from the sun. They come from the magnetotail. That's because there's, you've heard of the Van Allen belts and all that stuff. There's lots of stuff stored there. And that's what happens when the K index is elevated. It causes a disturbance, and the electrons come from there and they funnel into the polar cap, or the auroral oval. And it has a lot to do with the energy in the magnetic field. I guess why is it an oval? Well, that's a good question. I've never looked at that to understand the physics of why it's an oval around the geomagnetic pole.
Centrifugal force.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, I'm curious. I often lately, well, for a long time, operate mainly the low bands, but I know like on 15 meters, like sometimes it's completely dark here, but we can have a path into Asia at 11 o'clock at night. And I'm curious how exactly why that happens. It just seems strange, but I know it's true. I've worked it before.
Yeah, there's well, you got, okay, one thing is, after the sun sets, the F2 region starts recombining, the positive ions and the electrons, but it's a very slow process. And I think in cycle 24, I could work Europe a couple hours after, not Europe, but Japan. I could work Japan a couple hours after our sunset. And that's because the F2 regions, this takes a while to decrease in ionization. So that's a possibility.
Well, this seems different than that because like the band is completely dead.
Okay.
And then at 11, 12 o'clock, boom, we've got an opening into Asia. So it's not a slow decline. I've worked that opening before,
Okay.
and it happens here.
Yeah.
I just don't know why. I just know it is.
Okay. Well, if you can send me the conditions or the date under which it happens, it might be more obvious.
Okay. I don't know if I can, well, maybe the next time it happens.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, so.
Yeah. So what that says, it'll probably never happen again, right?
Oh, no, this is gonna happen.
Oh, no, it regularly happens. Yeah, we have this midnight opening on 20 or 15 to JA. Just
It's
boom,
not just
turns on
to
like a
J,
switch.
it's not just to JA, it's also
Okay.
to North Central Europe.
Well,
Yeah.
okay. There's something else, have to look at let's see here. Yeah. Another possibility is there are patches of F2 region ionization, enhanced F2 regions of ionization that drift across the polar cap. And I've seen West Coast stations work Europe on 15 and 20 meters when it's dark in North America.
Yeah.
And that generally happens best in the winter months. That's when those F2 region patches are most dominant.
Mm-hmm.
So there's all kinds of interesting stuff going on.
Yeah, Carl, I have a medium level station here, and I can remember, and I can't tell you time of year, but some really spectacular runs into Europe on 20 in the fairly late evening, like the guys are talking about.
Yep. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question, like on 10 meters, lately I haven't operated 10 meters in more than a decade, but I'm a 5. I'm from Texas, South Texas, which is really on the same latitude as Cairo, Egypt, and Houston.
Okay.
And those guys there, twice a day, they get long path openings on 10 meters. I've never heard a long path opening on 10 meters here.
Oh, you haven't? That's interesting because
well, I don't operate that often on 10 meters, but there it's like clockwork, punch the clock. Happens often, twice a day. And I curious, why the huge difference in latitude?
Yeah, because I remember
I saw a 10-meter long path opening in cycle 23 around year 2000, somewhere in there. 10
No,
meters
I'm not talking about I saw one like a UFO report. This is something these guys can kind of rely on happening like a lot of the time, more than half of the days in the month or stuff like that.
Yeah.
This is a one-time event in one of the contests.
That reminds me, I think it was N6AW maybe. I think that was his call. He had a article in the old, what was the DX magazine? I guess it was the DX magazine by N4AA. He had an article about 10-meter long path, and it was in the later evening from California, and he worked long path on 10 meters into Europe.
Yeah.
And it was quite regular. Yep. It's there. If the cycle is big enough, it could be there. Yep.
It was well over 150 in those days.
Oh, yeah. Okay. Then, yeah. In fact, what's really interesting when you look at 10-meter long path, if you're in Texas, the original NT5C guy, somebody else has his call now, I believe. In the morning, he could work long path into Southeast Asia, and then in the evening he could work into Europe. It
Yeah.
was a dual.
Yeah,
Yeah.
this is what happens in, can happen in Houston. You get long path one way, and then the evening you get long path the other way. And
Yeah, I think that could happen anywhere, but of course it depends if the other end of the path is in a populated area.
well, some of this depends on the guys having their friggin' radios on at the
Yeah,
right
that's
time,
true.
but just because the path's open doesn't mean you're gonna talk to anybody.
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, well, interesting.
Yeah, it's all this stuff is interesting, and the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know.
Yeah, but I know this happens. I was at a particular W5 station. I won't mention his call right now, but he's kind of a quirky, weird knothead, but 10 meters is his gig. And yeah, I'm very sure that this happens in the Houston area regularly on 10 meters if conditions are good enough to have 10-meter openings.
I saw it from San Antonio in the 60s. That would be cycle 21, I guess.
Oh, no, this was happening in the last cycle, even though it was a fairly weak cycle. It could be. I was actually there. I was really hyped up to 10-meter my butt off, and it was a dud weekend.
Yeah.
So what can you say? That's kind of how it worked out. But well, I think there's just an incredible number of variables in this stuff.
Yep.
Matt, I'm intrigued. Is that a live cat behind you?
No, that's actually a wallpaper, but yes, that is my cat. And right now he's off somewhere. He was causing me lots of trouble. He slept all day and then he wanted to play. And then I wanted to do radio and watch the movie here. And he's trying to muck with me, and we had to regulate that. And I turned the video off for a while I was regulating cat problems, but I don't know where he's at right now, but I opened my screen door so that he could sit and look outside.
I'm
Hey,
calling
Jim?
my cat.
Jim, K9YC, what URL was I going to send to you? Do you remember?
Some of the things that would predict the or discuss the sporadic E on 6 meters.
Oh, yeah. K1YOW and G3YLA. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, man.
Do we have any more questions for Carl?
I've got lots of questions. I just can't think of them right now.
Right.
It's getting kind of late over there in Indiana, so maybe we should wrap it up here.
Thanks very much, Carl.
You're welcome.
In any contest, you just have to be on the radio and be aware of what's happening.
That's right. Yeah, there you go.
Predictions are fine, but real time is now.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm going to stop sharing then.
Well, thank you so much.
Thanks, Carl.
You're welcome.
I sure hope there's not going to be a test.
No test. Quiz. Yeah, there you go. All right. Bye-bye.